Hi, Stephen here from Fated Crossings, and today I would like to talk about the phases of the planets, because currently the planets, all of them, are undergoing a mass easternization relative to the sun. This is something that rarely, if ever, gets talked about, and it's one of the core underpinnings of all astrology. It never gets talked about because unlike a lot of the pop concepts in mainstream astrology, the pop psychological concepts about psyche and reincarnation and all this other stuff that sounds high speed and really cool, when we start talking about planetary phase, then eyes kind of glaze over, and it's hard. It's a hard concept, and that's one reason why it does not get talked about. Another reason it does not get talked about is because these concepts dropped out of astrology around the age of Enlightenment, when astrology was abandoned in Europe. And what I want to represent here today is the idea that the concept of planetary phase is central to understanding how the planets manifest what they manifest. Another reason that we should talk about it is because this idea of being east or west relative to the sun impacts the gender dynamics of the planets. Just as in real modern life, in the occult world and in metaphysics, gender exists along a spectrum. It exists as a gradation. Something is not solidly masculine or feminine in a black and white way in the occult world. But instead, in astrology, the planets can become masculinized or feminized, depending on whether they show up in an eastern relationship to the sun or the western relationship to the sun. And another reason it's important to talk about this concept is because planetary phase is related to other ideas that we are familiar with, such as the planet's retrogradation cycle. So, as a for instance, around Halloween, not too long ago, I could go out onto my balcony in the early evening, and see Venus. I could visually inspect Venus, this glorious, luminescent speck in the night sky, almost as if God or the Archangel Metatron or the Easter Bunny or something pierced the night sky and allowed some radiance to flow through down to us. When you see Venus in the evening sky, the evening Venus, she's unmistakable. You can't miss her. She's one of the brightest things in the sky. And so until recently, I would enjoy going out on my balcony and visually observing Venus. I would enjoy watching her. I could see Jupiter and Saturn there, and she would be in the west. My balcony faces west. In the evening, she would be there reliably. But when she went retrograde, she started backing up into the sun, and then Venus vanished. Now, you can imagine what the effect that this had on the primitive mind. You see Venus there. Stevie Wonder could see her. You know what I mean? She is just gloriously radiant, and then all of a sudden, she's not there anymore. And you can imagine the impact that this had on the primitive mind. And then, after Venus disappears from the western sky in the evening, after some time, she starts appearing in the eastern sky in the morning, in the dark of the morning. And so what accounts for this phenomenon, and what effects does this have on the real world? Because the visibility of a planet is linked to its manifestation. What is visible is manifest, and what is not visible is hidden. So without further ado, let's get right to it, and I will attempt to explain this concept of planetary phase. This horoscope is a map of the sky over my location in a tony, leafy suburb of Baltimore for Halloween at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, to understand the eastern or western relationship of the planets, we have to consider the sun, because the sun is the foundation for the system. So we would draw a line, an opposition line from the sun's position at 8 degrees 24 minutes of Scorpio to about 8 degrees and 24 minutes of Taurus. So somewhere like right around in here. Please excuse the scraggly nature of the line. I just want to demonstrate the principle. So everything in an earlier degree from the sun up to the opposition point is east of the sun. And what this means practically is that these planets are rising before the sun in the morning. And I'll show you what I mean here in a bit. And everything in later zodiacal degrees from the sun is west of the sun. And these planets will set in the evening when the sun sinks below the horizon. This red line here is the horizon. So this red line represents where I go and plant my derriere on my balcony when I sit out there in the evening after a long day laboring over the astrological affairs of the world with my favorite adult beverage and observe Venus doing her little dance in the evening sky in the west. So let me demonstrate what I mean. First of all, we can see that the sun has just concluded, is separating from a conjunction with Mars in Scorpio. So Mars is feminized a bit simply because he's in a feminine sign. Now, this does not make the Mars effeminate. It simply injects a dose of yin into this very yang planet, sort of calms him down a little bit, puts him in touch with his feminine side. But because Mars has just experienced a conjunction with the sun, he has changed his phase. When the sun was over here in Libra, Mars was west of the sun, and this feminized him even more. But because Mars has now experienced this conjunction, he is now masculinized a little bit more. So you see how the gender dynamics exist along a spectrum. Mars is feminized because he's in Scorpio, a feminine planet, but he's masculinized a bit because of this conjunction with the sun. So let's advance this chart a few hours. The sun is making his meridian transit to the midheaven. You see, he just made it. The day is getting later. We're now at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The moon has just set. Notice that the moon before then was out of sect and out of her domain. She's a nocturnal planet, but when she was above the horizon, she was totally out of place. But now she has set and she is in her nocturnal domain, even though the sun is still up. And the sun is transiting to the west. See, Mars and Mercury have just set. The sun is setting. And Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter are in the sky. They're not quite visible yet. Venus probably would be faintly visible because the sun is setting. But now the sun is solidly below the horizon, and boom, there's Venus in the west, in the western portion of the chart, very visible, and you can see her. Jupiter also is extremely visible as well, up here at the top of the sky. Saturn is a dim little prick. Now, you can probably hunt high and low and never find an astrological textbook that describes Saturn as a dim little prick. It's rather bodacious and audacious, sort of like giving the middle finger to Cthulhu, but there you have it. Saturn is so faint in the night sky, but you can still see him. He's visible. So now Venus is very visible, and you can see her because the sun is below the horizon. When the sun was back up above the horizon, you could not see Venus because it was too bright. There's too much daylight, and none of these planets are visible. But now the sun sets, and you can see what I mean about the eastern planets. In this case, the eastern planets, let's not forget, there's this invisible opposition line here dividing the chart into eastern and western hemispheres. These eastern planets are going to rise before the sun in the morning. So now we're at about midnight. We're going to 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and Mercury is creeping above the horizon here, and he may be just kind of faintly visible. He's above the horizon, and we can perhaps see him a little bit. Probably not too much because he's still a little bit too close to the sun, but he is rising. So actually, Mercury is still probably maybe a little too close to the sun to be visible. He's right there at the edge. So here we have fast forwarded to early January, about 10 o'clock in the morning, and Venus has turned retrograde, and she is very close to the sun now. So let's advance the chart to sunset, and we can see that because of her proximity to the sun, she is not going to be visible. So I will be disappointed going out on my balcony in the evening. Venus is not going to be there. I'm going to feel abandoned by the goddess of love and will be yearning for her. Where is she at? Where has she gone? And again, imagine what the primitive mind would have thought about this. Saturn and Jupiter are still visible in the evening sky in the west. And of course, Mars now is thoroughly masculinized in a masculine sign here in early January, Sagittarius. And he is rising before the sun. He is east of the sun. And so in the morning time, he is going to be very visible in the dark of the morning hours, rising before the sun. So here Mars comes approaching the horizon, and there he goes. He crests the horizon, and he is definitely very visible in the east, in the eastern sky, and rising before the sun in the morning. So now we fast forward to today, actually tomorrow morning around 5 a.m. And we can see that Venus is preparing to rise ahead of the sun in the east. So if I want to see Venus, if I want to see this Venus-Mars conjunction, then I'm going to have to wake up super early at but o'clock in the morning and go on the opposite side of my house to see Venus in the eastern sky before the sun comes up, and she will be visible. But now we turn our attention to Saturn and Jupiter because they are preparing to change their phase. When the sun completes his conjunction with Saturn, Saturn will go from being to the west of the sun to being to the east of the sun. So this conjunction with Saturn, we're advancing day by day, the end of the month now, and we get into early February, and the sun is getting closer and closer to Saturn. Saturn is no longer visible, by the way. He has now vanished from the sky as he prepares to change his phase, as he prepares to become a little bit more feminized, a little bit more masculinized when he becomes east of the sun. So there we go. Now Saturn has changed his phase, and we are dealing with a totally different Saturn, even a better Saturn, because the superior planets, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, prefer to be east of the sun, whereas the inferior planets, Venus and Mercury, prefer to be west of the sun. So now Mercury, Venus, and Mars are thoroughly masculinized due to their phase with the sun. This is a different Venus than the one that I was accustomed to observing, a less effeminate and more, dare I say, warlike and aggressive sort of a Venus. So now let's advance this a month ahead, maybe to March, early March. And now Jupiter is preparing to change his phase as he undergoes a conjunction with the sun. He will now vanish from the night sky, no longer is visible. And believe me, Jupiter is incredibly bright. You can't mistake seeing Jupiter in the sky. But he's no longer there. He vanished. And you can see here, all of these planets are eastern. So what we are undergoing right now, as I speak, is a massive easternization of all of the planets, which will definitely change their outcomes, their manifestations. See, this is shortly before sunrise, and all of these planets would be visible in the night sky in the east, shortly before sunrise. This is around 6:15 in the morning. And so as we progress through March, the sun elongates from Jupiter, and Jupiter will eventually, pretty soon, emerge from his invisibility. Even as Mercury, notice how Mercury is approaching the sun now. Mercury is going to go invisible and change his phase. But now the sun is getting into Aries. It's the Aries ingress now. And Jupiter is slowly but surely becoming more visible in the sky. And here we have an ideal situation where all of the superior planets are eastern of the sun. So you could go outside around the end of March, and around 5 o'clock in the morning, see all of these planets, Mars, Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, in the eastern sky before the sun arises. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg, quite frankly. It's the tip of the iceberg because not only can a planet be east or west of the sun, it can be east or west in the world. So here is the horizon, and here is the meridian. Everything in this little pie slice right here in these three houses, in this section of the sky, is east of the world. Same thing with this section of the chart as well, houses 5 through 7. These sections of the chart are eastern relative to the world, and this masculinizes the planets even further, whereas these chart quadrants are west in the world, and they feminize the planets. And again, this has a definite outcome, a definite influence on the manifestation of these planets. So there you have it, a brief tutorial to help you recapture some lost interpretive principles that hopefully will help you understand planetary manifestations a little bit better. Some of the core principles. A, planetary phase is determined by the sun. Draw an imaginary opposition line. Everything earlier than that line up to the opposition point is east of the sun, and it means that these planets rise in the morning prior to the sun. It means that these planets have been masculinized, and so they are perhaps a little bit more yang, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more assertive than they otherwise would be. And this is a prime and optimal condition for the superior planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. So if you have these planets in earlier degrees than the sun, then this actually adds to their dignity. It actually adds to their effectiveness. So in the complicated procedure of determining a planet's quality, we first of all ask if it's what the category of the planet is, whether it's a night planet or a day planet, whether this night or day planet is positioned favorably to the sun, being above the horizon or below the horizon, whether it fits into the sect of the chart, and also we add to that this determination of whether it is east of the sun or west of the sun. Planets that want to be east of the sun, such as Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, they perform better and are a little bit more socially acceptable when they are actually east of the sun, and they are perhaps a bit more problematic when they are west of the sun. Also, we need to understand that this phase of the planet determines its gender characteristics. That's also very important. And we need to understand that the phase of the planet affects the planet's visibility and what side of the Earth it appears on. Venus, for example, when she's in the west, she was anciently known as Venus of Uruk, which is a very effeminate Venus, the kind of Venus that will bake you cookies and all of this good stuff. Whereas the Venus in the east in the morning was known as Venus of Akkad, and she was a warlike goddess. She was worshipped as such, a goddess of bloodletting. The Romans knew her as Lucifer, or Lucifer, the light bearer, and the Greeks knew her as Phosphoros, which also means light bearer. And again, she was just very warlike, and in terms of the personality, she is going to signify a woman who is not really all that interested in the domestic amenities of life. She's going to be much more assertive and much more aggressive than usual. So again, the superior planets like to be east of the sun, and the inferior planets, Mercury and Venus, get a little bit more effectiveness and dignity when they are west of the sun. So I know it's all very complicated, but these principles are absolutely vital to understanding the real astrology as opposed to the saccharine, new age, ineffective sort of modern pop astrology that seems to be so popular. The impractical astrology that seems to be all the rage these days. If you want to do practical horoscopy and really understand the influence of the planets in your life, then this concept is essential. So, as I mentioned, all of the planets are undergoing a mass easternization. They are changing their phase very soon, within the next couple of months, and this will absolutely have an impact, not only for birth charts, but also for the world at large. Thank you for watching, and if you want to contact me, the address is steven@fatedcrossings.com. See you next week.